Hello, and welcome to Think Tank. Think tanks are really a place and a process and a way to think differently so that we can get to better outcomes, better solutions, more innovative ways of approaching our work. And in our case in particular, in human services, in the social sector, in this disability service organization called Skills Society, our main goal is we want to increase the experience of citizenship for people with disabilities. This whole crazy think tank process and think tank environment originated from my graduate studies a few years ago around learning about how do we foster relevant creativity in organizations. So if you were to ask, why would you have a think tank? A key piece is that we need to get better outcomes, better quality of life for people. In order to do that, we need new ways to look at our work. And part of that has been our think tanks and the creative processes that we've borrowed from companies like IDEO and other great titans of the creativity worlds that have helped people think differently, but it applies in any field, any sector. Creativity, it's all about not being stuck in a rigid mindset. So it's being able to jiggle up and shake up habits to be able to see things differently. And that's so important for an organization that's trying to do something different. To a good creative process, you need to have at least these two essential phases. One is around divergent thinking and the other is around convergent thinking. So divergent thinking is around coming up with lots of different possibilities. It's around encouraging wild ideas. It's around not listening to that little part of ourselves that is saying, oh, that's not going to work, oh, this isn't going to be. It's about lots of possibilities. This is how some of the best innovations come about, from people connecting really dissimilar subjects, really dissimilar ideas. So one example would be a classic one, the guy who invented the television, Philo Farnsworth. He was watching his farm one day. He was about 14 years old, and noticing the way that hay was lined up in perfect rows on his farm. And he got this idea to think about how he could take that principle of rows out of his farm by taking a cathode ray tube, so a big light tube, and blacking out little black and white dots on it, just like the hay bales on his farm. Taking that idea from farming and applying it to technology, applying it in that field. That's very divergent, that's very different. It's not so sane and logical to think in that way. So divergent thinking is where we encourage lots of wild ideas. The main thing is, the main killer of divergent thinking is fear. Thinking we're not good enough, we can't do it, oh, it's not a good idea. That's the main killer of it. So you need to create an environment, a process and an atmosphere where people are encouraged to keep thinking big, thinking differently. And that's why we have all this wild stuff, why we have the couches, why we have a process that encourages all this. The second part is where you take all the hundreds of ideas you might come up with, and then you need to find out what's actually relevant. What is a kind of outcome we want to this challenge? In our case, it's about the aim of supporting citizenship of people with disabilities and helping increase that. So what's going to be relevant to that? This is where we have to use our critical thinking skills and sort through and say, oh, that's not going to work, this might not work. This is a phase where we can really throw wet blankets on the whole process and shoot down people and give people a sense of fear. So we really have to be careful. So that's why there's a whole through the process we talk about the importance of how do we keep fostering trust with each other. And also we've used some stuff from Peter Senge, who's a big guru in the whole leadership in organizations. And so one of the key principles we talk about is, rather than saying, if you disagree with something, you think it's a wrong idea, rather than saying nothing or telling the other person why you think they're wrong, we say something along the lines of, that's not the way I see it, here's where my perspective is coming from. So describing your biases, describing where you're coming from, and then asking questions. So tell me why you think this would be a relevant idea. How do you think this fits? Just doing that shift really helps to sustain trust and to sustain the momentum of having a positive think tank. Well, there's been a long history of things like brainstorming, and there's also a lot of controversy around whether brainstorming in groups really helps people to get to better solutions and ideas, or whether you might need something a little different than that. In terms of the process of think tanks, we were really quite purposeful in how how we were going to design and structure these think tank conversations. One really important piece was that we have a space that's really comfortable. We have couches, we have kind of fun stuff on the walls. We created the space together. People brought different objects that represented to have fun, to have humor, playfulness, to have critical thinking, to be aware of the biases we're looking through, what colored glasses, that idea of biases that we're looking through, to be careful of that when we're bringing that to a think tank. And we ended up coming up with a process that we now use in the think tanks. And it's quite structured. It borrows partially from design thinking. It also borrows from traditional creative problem-solving processes. So what we've kind of learned over time that's helped, and we're still tweaking this process, so we're still learning and seeing what works, but one of the things we first do is a check-in, and the check-in really helps with kind of seeing where we're at, empathizing, getting us on kind of a similar page of understanding.
No, I'm good. I'm a bit tired, but that was fun playing guitar in our t-shirts.
It's a good thing we were wearing t-shirts.
Oh yeah.
You guys have so much fun at work.
Not always.
We need it when things get heavy. Yeah.
No doubt.
After a long couple of weeks, I think I'm over that bump of work and some of the crappiness that has come with the last 2 weeks. So today's a new start.
It works, so yeah. I like that resourcefulness.
You think you've had a bad day?
Yeah.
Bad day at work.
Yeah.
So you're bringing your donkey next week.
Exactly.
So that's the check-in. Then we pick what we call a rotating steward. And it's kind of like a facilitator, timekeeper, but we really like this word steward because it's more of an active participant rather than a cold facilitator, which can, if you have a kind of the cold facilitator role, it can make it more difficult for people to feel comfortable in it. And we rotate it so everyone gets to have that leadership role. Yeah, we'll give you the little duck quacker.
Sure, I'll do that.
And it just helps us because if somebody's talking too much, we empower you with the duck. Participant observer is somebody that kind of checks our process and says, how are we doing? What were the lulls? What worked? What didn't work? They recognize some of those things and they bring it up at the end of our think tank session. The next thing is we let loose with ideas, and this is where it gets fun and wacky. We encourage wild ideas. People start sharing stories. We start thinking about ideas. So, in our case, what are all the things that a person we support likes? What are all their interests? We start exploring that.
Like acting, and then cooking, and like fashion show, design the dresses stuff.
And then thinking about how might we connect that in a way that's meaningful for them, that would be interesting to them in the community to have, an outcome around a life of full participation and citizenship. One part that's often missed and gives brainstorming a bad rap is that you lack the part at the end where you say, okay, now what, so what? What is the conversion phase? What are relevant ideas, and how do we define, what's going to be a relevant idea to act on? So there we go through it, and first and foremost, it has to relate that this is something that an individual wants. So we have to check in with the person. Do you want to explore a new, drum group or a new zombie book club because you're into zombie movies and zombie books, or motorcycle club, or whatever it may be?
I think that we need to explore whether or not the fashion part is even really
Right.
I think that with maybe the proposition of having something done or made may change the focus though.
After we've gone through divergence, convergence, where we've come back together, then the team would agree and say, okay, this seems like the most relevant 3 action items to go on. The person has said yes, they want to explore. So who could help with what of all these tons of ideas to explore? I'll check with Nate and Stu and Yvonne on the filmmaking.
If that's the route she wants to go, then I would be okay with maybe trying to get a hold of like a hair salon or a makeup place.
We need to really ensure that think tanks and creative problem solving, creative thinking leads to better quality outcomes, that it doesn't just kind of go nowhere and feels really nice. So that's really important, that we always end up on the action part. And then the participant observer makes some comments around our process, and that helps us recognize that so we don't get off track. And so next time, what are the key things we need to remember to keep think tanks flowing really well, to support each other, to come up with new, fresh ideas. And then we do a checkout. Where's everybody at? You know, how are we feeling? Throughout the whole thing, an important question that we're all aware of is, you know, what can we do to foster trust with others? That's everybody's responsibility. It's not something of, hey, let's just trust each other. That doesn't work. It's a matter of what can we do and say that helps foster trust in our think tanks.
Well, you have to block off the time. We've gotten too much into a culture of go, go, go. And without stopping and thinking of where we're going, it doesn't promote creativity. You don't get the chance to get new ideas.
I think part of the piece is coming together with an open mind and bringing your experiences to the table, and being open enough and aware enough not to shoot any ideas down, because that particular idea may not fit what you're looking for, but it's always a small piece of the puzzle that you can build on.
Whenever I go to think tanks, I always come away from think tanks feeling really rejuvenated, like fresh. We feel so comfortable with one another, and a lot of very good ideas have generated through think tank just by talking to one another. I feel that the only way you're going to learn is from each other, and coming together and sharing all these great ideas have been invaluable.
Getting broken in there.
Is that it?
Not bad. We got lots of room.
So this is the real think tank. Actually, you'll notice it's a padded room.
Stop the elevator.
See, we can afford to eat more donuts so we can fit us all in here.
It would suck to get stuck in here.
So hot. Hard to break it through the ceiling and stuff in there.
That makes for a good video.